Good morning, everybody. I want to talk about detecting cancer at stage -1. My dad, his name is Robert, he died when I was 17. He was 44. Had cancer in his kidney, and then his kidney was taken out, and then it showed up again in his lung. This guy, his name is Tom Hubyar. He was a Silicon Valley CEO. He was the closest thing I had to a dad as an adult. He died at age 71 of pancreatic cancer. I spent the last week of his life by his bedside in the ICU in Reno, Nevada, and miss him dearly. This is Alex Smiley. He died of leukemia at age 13. He was my children's good friend. And so I don't think there's anybody in the room who hasn't been touched by cancer, and we need to do something about this. So I have a very interesting background. I'm not a PhD. I don't work at a university. I'm a business consultant. Most people in the marketing space know me as the guy who wrote the book on Google advertising. I founded, conflicts of interest. I founded a 501c3 called Reversing Cancer, which is actively involved in several of the projects you're going to see here. We're working to fund Azra Raz's open tissue repository. I also founded a company called Natural Code LLC, which has a $10 million prize for the origin of the genetic code. We live in the information age, and nobody knows where information came from. And we announced it. That photo there was taken at the Royal Society 5 years ago. I announced this prize with Oxford professor Dennis Noble. And I wrote a book called Evolution 2.0, Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design. That book was born 20 years ago, and I got in an argument with my brother, who was a missionary in China. He said, I don't believe this stuff anymore. I'm not even sure I believe in God anymore. I'm done being a missionary and I'm going home. We got into an argument, and it turned into a creation evolution argument. And I said, well, I'm an engineer, and I think this hand at the end of my arm is a really nice piece of engineering, and I should know. And you don't think this is an accumulation of random accidents, do you? And everybody's had this argument with somebody. We all know this argument. And I had never studied evolution, and I decided to stop arguing with them and go home and hit the books. And I hit the books hard. And I said, well, I haven't taken a biology class since high school, but I know how to read a scientific paper. I know the scientific process. So I'm going to dig into this, and there must be something either the biologists know that the engineers don't know, or something the engineers know that the biologists don't know, because this story of billiard balls banging around in the universe and natural selection and you get a hand, this does not make any sense to me. And so I said, I am going to get to the bottom of this. So I did. And I could have never imagined how fascinating actual evolution really is. And I couldn't believe that nobody was talking about this stuff. So I'm going to get into that in a second. So this eventually got me into cancer. And I will, 4 years ago, my science mentor, James Shapiro at the University of Chicago, reached out to me and he said, we are putting together a symposium on cancer and evolution in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Will you help us? And I said, absolutely. I know how to organize conferences. I know how to market conferences, and I know evolution. So here we go. COVID hit, it got pushed to Zoom, and it turned into the Cancer and Evolution Working Group, which is now part of AACR, and it has 3,500 member scientists. And so I've been in the cancer field for 4 years. This graph shows incidence of death over the last century. My slide deck is a compilation of mostly data from the MD Anderson 3 weeks ago conference on polyploid giant cells. And you can see that death due to cancer has very slightly declined over the last 100 years, and then heart disease has gone down and other diseases gone up and down. We're really not making a lot of progress on cancer in the aggregate. Well, when I went down the evolution rabbit hole, what I figured, it really took me about 2 years to figure out that nobody was telling the real story. I found out that if you went to Barnes and Noble and picked up the typical book on evolution that the typical person would find, what you got was a bunch of intellectual slop. They would say evolution through natural selection. No, that's backwards. It's natural selection through evolution. Natural selection does not do anything. It doesn't create anything. That's a complete reversal of cause and effect. I found out about people like Barbara McClintock, who in the 1940s discovered that a corn plant, if its DNA was damaged, would repair its own DNA in a novel way and engineer a solution when it couldn't find a way around, and it would do it in real time. And I was like, why is anybody talking about this? And I discovered that most of the science profession was drenched in a Darwinian selfish gene quasi-religion that didn't actually make any sense to an engineer. Barbara McClintock made sense to an engineer. Lynn Margulis made sense to an engineer. Michael Levin made sense to an engineer. So this led me down the cancer rabbit hole. Now, if you look on the National Cancer Institute website, I pulled this off yesterday, is cancer a genetic disease? Yes, cancer is a genetic disease. It is caused by changes in genes that control the way cells grow and multiply. That is wrong. Cancer is not a genetic disease. Cancer is the cells of your own body evolving out of control in response to stress. They are taking matters into their own hands. They're like a terrorist group that used to be loyal to the country and is now blowing up buildings to stay alive. And if you don't think of cancer as a self-aware, self-preserving, separate entity, you'll never understand it. And I pulled this 2 days ago. Michael Eisen at UC Berkeley posted this on Twitter 2 days ago. Every single thing people think happens in the smoke-filled rooms of science where power brokers collude actually happens and is way worse than you think it is. And if you don't believe me, ask Azra about the cancer mafia. I'm a business and marketing consultant. I have worked with thousands of companies in 300 industries, everything from bowling alleys to biotech companies to personal coaches to software firms. There is no profession where people are more afraid to say what they think than science. There is very little freedom of speech in science. Because I don't make my living in science, I can say anything I want and mostly get away with it as long as I'm polite. So I find this to be true. And I have a better definition of cancer. It's when the cells of your own body actively evolve changes for their own purposes rather than the collective. And genes are a trailing indicator of what the cell is already doing and wants to do. And as long as you're chasing genes, you have reversed cause and effect, and you will never, ever, ever solve it. So, I mentioned my mentor, James Shapiro. He is a bacterial geneticist at the University of Chicago. I believe he's the best evolution person alive. He is a walking repository of 50 years of literature. And when James Shapiro found Jinsong Liu's paper on polyploid giant cells, he flipped out. And Jim does not flip out, but he flipped out when he read this. I'm going to give you a little summary of Jinsong's work. He said a supergiant cell provides a cellular platform to reset the genome for new organisms throughout evolution. Right now, the cancer profession is dominated by the somatic mutation theory. It says that cancer is a genetic disease. There's a gene somewhere that got broken. If we can fix it, we can fix cancer. And it fails to explain almost anything. And it's extremely in the weeds, and it doesn't look at the big picture. And this slide goes into it. I don't have time for it to go through the whole slide. I took this from Azra Raza. This is from her slide deck at the MD Anderson conference. Two stress cells get together, they merge because they both feel threatened. They form a polyploid giant cell, which eventually starts spilling out cancer cells. You administer chemotherapy, it kills the cancer cells, does not kill the original tumor, then the tumor creates more cancer cells, and your sister-in-law dies of breast cancer at age 46, after her numbers were doing really good 4 months ago. Are you tired of it yet? So here's what is really going on. So let's say we're talking about your kidneys. Your kidneys used to be happy. They used to get smoke breaks, they used to get snack breaks, they used to get salads and pizza on Fridays, and now they're overworked and the taskmasters are flogging them, and it's sweaty in here and it's smelly in here, and get me out of here, and they want to leave, but they can't leave because they don't have any way to leave because they don't have any way to move. So they double up their genomes, triple, quadruple, which cells do under stress. It's like creating extra hard drive space where they now have experimental room to try stuff. They get really fat and they want out. And then a white blood cell comes swimming by, and the giant precancerous cell says, hey, I deleted my P53 gene. I am now immortal. Tell you what, let's make a deal. Let's do a merger acquisition. I'll give you immortality if you give me a ticket out of here. And they escape together out the window after their merger acquisition. And the resulting cell has an all access pass to the entire human body because it's an immune cell. And it's got a propeller. It's called a flagellum. And off it goes. And eventually that giant cell starts spilling out cancer babies. And that's where cancer starts. This theory's been in the literature for 150 years. First serious paper on it was in 1911, and it's resurfaced every 10 years for the last century. And in the last 10 or 15 years, a few people have gone after it seriously. Jin-Song Liu has devoted a ferocious amount of attention. I know because his wife told me it's all he thinks about. So I think this is one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen. Jin-Song Liu saw an eerie parallel between the development of a tumor and the development of an embryo. He walked across the street, read an embryology textbook, and he said, oh, I've seen this before. This is that. And I don't have time to go into detail, but I'll just quickly say that a baby, you start with sperm, you start with an egg, and then it gets fertilized by a sperm, and it turns into a multinucleated large cell, and then it turns into all the phases of an embryo, and a tumor goes through an identical set of stages to the point where you can even arrest tumor development with abortifacient drugs. This is really interesting stuff. This is genius. And so on the top is an embryo, and then on the bottom is a polyploid giant cell. So guess what? Maybe you just need to go talk to a human embryo expert, like my friend Stephen Palter in New York City, who has a 75% success rate with in vitro fertilization and can tell you anything you ever wanted to know about human embryos. And then there's a sister that's very much like a giant cell, but it's a little different. It's a cancer-associated macrophage type-like cell. And I'll just quickly run through some charts. The chart on the right shows that healthy humans don't have any camel cells. Stage 1 through 4 have 84 to 97% of patients in those stages have camel cells. This is a better marker than circulating tumor cells. And then there's more statistics showing that the more camel cells you have and the bigger the cells are, the worse off you are. This might be, we're not sure yet, but this might be a better way to detect cancer or judge what state of cancer you're in than a PET scan or a CAT scan. And so more charts, like if you look at the right, the longevity of people with no camel cells is 100%. And then the more they are and the bigger they are, the mortality rates just start going up. So they're very common in the blood of cancer patients. They're not in healthy controls. And point number 4, this is under investigation. So Ozra's work says that that point where a tissue cell and an immune cell come together, that is the onset of stage -1 cancer. And it can be detected with a glorified coffee filter called an ISET machine. And you can find these giant cells in the blood. Ozra was talking about this yesterday. So I want you to imagine, what if you go to Walgreens, get a simple test every year, and they could tell you that not only are you in stage -1, but the stage -1 cells are coming from the ovaries or the pancreas or the lungs or the kidneys. And now you can say, well, what do I want to do about the fact that I have a stressed organ who's about to go into cancer mode but is not there yet? Do you think might that be a little easier than stage 3 or 4? Do you think it might be a little cheaper? So it's easy to deal with cancer at stage 1 or 0 or -1. It's really hard at stage 3 and 4. This is where our money needs to go. So we can detect and treat cancer early. Ozra's lab has produced a bispecific antibody that only attaches to that merger acquisition pair. So they haven't figured out how to kill it, but they know how to paint a red bullseye on it. And this is where I think cancer is going. And she got an alliance of blue chip hospitals to agree to do this with cancer patients in remission. And all they need is the funding to do it. And I want to thank a whole bunch of people who have made this happen. And thank you very much, Sujan. It's been great being here.